All right. Why don't we get started? Well, we first off want to thank the audience here. The team at Breakwater Capital is excited to have a special guest. I'll give Maddie the floor in a moment to do a more formal introduction. But as I think back to the webinar series, which has really been going on since we launched in 2022, we try to spend some time outside of the normal content. We'll have a market update actually probably about a month from now for wrapping up Q1, which should be exciting. But this event today is really about executive function and handling your circumstances under stress. I can think about, in my household, my wife's the tougher of the two of us for sure. This literally we speak, she's navigating a mother with breast cancer, an aunt who we just checked into a memory care with dementia while running after two boys. And so, it's how you handle yourself with poise under pressure. And I know the world we live in is stressful, sometimes more often than not. And so, our guest Jim is going to go ahead and spend some time with us on that. I picked 6:30 mainly because I didn't want you guys watching the evening news. So we'll try to reduce a little stress this evening, but also we want to be sensitive. We'll make sure you're able to get to your brackets and watching the tournament tonight. So Maddie, why don't you go ahead and introduce our extra special guest, and we'll sit back and listen intently for the next hour or so.
Thanks, Jeff. We're definitely excited for everyone joining us, so thank you again. And, at Breakwater Capital Group, we truly believe that, financial planning, and we talk about this a lot with clients, is definitely more than just the numbers. And, it's really making sure that we know and our clients know how their wealth reflects their why. And, we have these conversations all the time, but whether we're sending children to college, purchasing clients' dream properties, achieving the retirement that they've always envisioned, it's our goal to be, your trusted guide along that journey and help you navigate that path to financial confidence and certainly fulfillment above and beyond what the numbers look like. And that is why we are especially excited for today's guest. His journey is a testament to the power of resilience, purpose, and living with intention. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Jim Kaveney today, an author, entrepreneur, and motivational speaker whose story is certainly nothing short of extraordinary. Jim is the author of Unlimited Heart: How to Transform Your Pain into Purpose. It is a powerful memoir that chronicles his incredible life journey from growing up as the youngest of 9, which I can't even fathom, in Erie, Pennsylvania, to launching a multi-million-dollar startup, to facing a life-threatening cardiac event that certainly forever changed his life perspective on business, health, and personal growth. As you'll hear from Jim, his story is certainly one of transformation and purpose. When he was faced with a massive cardiac crisis in 2018, Jim didn't just fight for survival, he redefined what it meant to thrive. His personal entrepreneurial vision and personal struggles became the foundation for Unlimited Heart, which is a mission-driven initiative that helps cardiac patients take charge of their health and live fuller lives. So without further ado, we are so excited to have Jim join us. And I will kick it off to him to get started.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Madeline, Jeff, and Tom, and everybody for joining this evening. Understanding it's I'm on the East Coast, so I understand it's dinner time for some folks, and maybe end of the day or getting near the end of the day. So thank you for your time and your energy this evening. And I promise that we'll go through this quickly, but more importantly, hopefully we'll be able to walk away with some motivation and inspiration as well, as we talk a little bit about the challenges that we face just as human beings in general, and what we can do to kind of rechannel ourselves, realign, and relaunch our initiatives as pain comes our way, because invariably it ultimately does. So give me half a second and I will kick the slide open and we'll get started. And as I'm teeing things up too, if there's questions that do pop up, my screen, I can't see everybody. So if you have a question, please submit that, and somebody just fill me in on whether or not somebody is there to ask a question. I want to keep this as open as possible.
We'll let you know, Jim. We appreciate that.
Perfect. All right, and can confirm you can see everything okay?
We can't, but give me 1 second here. Can you try to share again, Jim?
Yeah, I'll do that. That's sorry about that. Try it one more time.
Here we go.
There we go. Now we're rolling.
That was our user error, mine. I'll take credit for that one. Sorry about that.
All right. All good. All right, just getting everything shifted here. And what do you see there? You see my slide deck?
We do.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. This is the benefit of using multiple screens, but also technically a curse. All right. So you can see the singular slide, correct?
Yep.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, let's dive straight in. And so I want to start off right out of the gate with just a kind of rhetorical question. I don't need any answers at this point, but just want you to think about something in particular. When we think about the opportunities that present to ourselves, right? What is something that you could do today, ultimately to resolve, that you could eventually do to make your life better or the life of somebody else better? And I pose that question, and again, I don't want any answers right now, but I want you to think about this because we're going to come back and visit this question again. And I pose this, one of my favorite authors is a gentleman by the name of Napoleon Hill, wrote a book, Think and Grow Rich, very famous, America's first really technically self-help book that was written back in the 1930s. And one of the quotes that I love from him is your big opportunity may be right here, right now. And so as we talk about the essence and the idea around Carpe diem and seizing the day, which we're going to dive into that in a second here, this will start to open up the opportunities for a mind to realize what it is that we can do and not be held or constrained by anything out there that might be holding us back. And so before we dive into that, again, I want to formally thank, Jeff, Madeline, and Tom for giving me the opportunity here. Jokingly, I actually invest with another group, and I said to them, boy, you guys have to learn from this group here at Breakwater because they do some really cool things with their clients. And so hopefully this will change the way they manage some things on their end for all of us. But I wanted to talk because specifically about Carpe Diem, and what does that mean? How do we embrace life with an unlimited heart? And so we're going to tie into all these words that are up on that slide, particularly because it's really about my journey, but more so it's how we can tap into the things that we all face individually, and how do we really understand what Carpe Diem truly means and what the whole purpose of it is, and how do we do it, right? Particularly. But I want to, before we dive into that, I'll just give you a little bit of my history, right? And so my journey in life, and if you look at the upper left-hand corner of this slide, you'll see Cathedral Prep Rambler. So that was my high school that I went to. And the bottom right, as they just said, I just founded a new company called Unlimited Heart. But in between all of that is really, it looks like a very clean resume, but it's actually quite messy, everything in between. And I often refer to, Steve Jobs, and I don't know if everybody's seen Steve Jobs, one of his famous commencement speeches, was that when we look at our life, we never look at the dots in our life moving forward. We only look at the dots in our life looking in rears. And so I say that because as we look at, and as I sit here and I stand with you guys today, I think about all the stuff that happened before for me, which ultimately turned me into who I am today. And so we might not know why we're going through what we're going through today and the challenges that we face, but maybe a year from now, 5 years from now, it'll all become very clear. And so my resume, as you can see here, looks really clear, but it's quite messy. And actually, it's kind of funny a little bit too, because I think it's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, so to speak. When I was at Cathedral Prep in high school, and if you were to take a look at my yearbook, there's a picture of me, and right next to me is my quote that I picked for my senior passage. And sometimes I wonder why I chose it, but I was a huge fan, and I'm not ashamed of my age. I'm 50 some years old. So I graduated in 1992, and the band Rush was huge player in my life. And the song that I loved was Free Will by Rush. And so my quote was, if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. And so I love that because even if you say, I'm not going to make a choice to do anything, you're still deciding something, right? So at the end of the day, you still choose. And what's funny about that is because then I transferred and moved to college. I went to Mercyhurst University, and Mercyhurst University is in Erie, Pennsylvania as well. And the funny aspect about Mercyhurst, its university motto is Carpe Diem. But nobody at Mercyhurst ever taught me in the 4 years that I was there how to Carpe Diem or seize the day. So it's a little ironic that the university that espouses that this is our mantra doesn't really teach people how to build a program around it. But when I was at Mercyhurst, ultimately I wanted to be a biology major, which I ultimately graduated with my biology degree, but I was going to be a doctor. And I figured out that was too long. And then I wanted to be get into public health. And then I figured, nah, that's really not overly exciting. So then I went down the route of physical therapy. And so I completed my senior thesis around physical therapy and everything else. And then I realized, no, I don't want that at all either. And so my college professor said to me at one point, he says, you are ultimately going to graduate with a degree in confusion because you really have no idea where you want to go. And I said, that's okay, right? Because again, if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. But when I was graduating as my senior year, and I was a collegiate rower as well. And so there we were at the senior athletic dinner, and my college rowing coach says to me as he's really congratulating all my peers who were going off to med school or business school or whatever they were doing. And he really had nothing for me to say. They had nothing really truly to say about me because I wasn't going anywhere. I was actually going back to school the following year. But he said, Jim, the world is your oyster. Now, at the time, I took that very offensively because I thought to myself, wow, that doesn't sound very good, right? But now as I think about it, the world is your oyster. I can go take a bite out of anything. But I needed to make those choices. I needed to find something that was going to drive me. What was my passion? What was my purpose? And so between Mercyhurst and the next thing, which was Alchemy Partners, which was ultimately the business that I started in 2012. So I found my purpose. And in between Mercyhurst and Alchemy, like I said, it was a messy stuff, but I was in biotech and pharmaceuticals and all that other stuff. So I was a director of training. I was a sales leader and all those things. But I loved it, but I didn't really feel my passion until I started Alchemy Partners, which was a life sciences learning and performance company. So we built training materials for pharma and biotech. Ultimately, it was great. I built the business, and we'll go into some details a little bit later, but ultimately private equity acquired my business in 2020 called Eversana. And then I left Eversana, wrote my book, Unlimited Heart, How to Transform Your Pain into Purpose, because I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenges that I faced in my life, both my entrepreneurial journey as well as my cardiac journey together. And it's those painful points that ultimately, as Madeline said earlier, it's what helped to reposition me into a more purposeful life. And that's why I want to share some key things with you this evening. But let's talk a little bit about what Carpe Diem is not, right? And at the end of the day, it's not sitting around and waiting for inspiration. It's really about giving yourself a swift kick in the butt every single day. And it's required to do this every single day because nobody else is going to do it for you. So if you think people are going to bring inspiration and provide you with opportunities, that's really not the case. You have to find this internally for yourself. Now, Madeline shared with me the list of clientele that are with you guys. You've obviously been wildly successful in whatever you're doing, but I've also heard there's tons of entrepreneurs that and small business owners that are within this firm as well, which is great. So you know the challenges and everything that you face, whether it's working for somebody or building your own business. You need to be self-motivated to do, and in order to do so, and this is clearly what you have done. So let's talk a little bit about what is Carpe Diem. Oops, there we go. So what is Carpe Diem and where does it ultimately come from? Now, I often reflect on my exposure to this when I was, back in 1989 when Dead Poets Society came out. And I'm not sure if folks remember this movie or watched it, but I loved it so much because I was like, what does this all mean, right? Seize the day. I had no idea what that meant. Little did I know at that point in my life in 1989 that I would go to a university who would also have that mantra of seize the day, but never really show me how to go about doing so. So I had to figure those things out myself. So, but Carpe Diem doesn't start in 1989. Where does it actually start? So historically, I want to go back a little bit in history because this kind of sets the framework of what we're going to talk about tonight. And Horace, back in the Roman Empire, was one of the famous poets and satirists at the time. And the true mantra is written carpe or spoken. And I was I took Latin for 4 years in high school, and clearly doesn't translate well. But it was carpe diem quam minimum credulo postero, which really it doesn't say anything about seizing the day in the translation below. It talks about plucking the day, trusting as little as possible in the next one, right? Because this is how you go about self-actualization. If you don't know if tomorrow's going to come, then you better really take care of today. But I also want to say too, because we know this is life and things stink sometimes. And so sometimes you might want to take the word pluck and take out the P and the L and maybe put another letter in there. And that's okay, because we're going to talk about how we do that and how we manage those challenges. because it's trials, tribulations, they're going to come to us. But how do we overcome that? That's really what we're going to do. Now, obviously 23 BC is a long time ago, but I'm going to kick it back even further. Now, I'm unabashedly Catholic, so I'm not here to preach to you guys and gals, but what I want to share with you, when we look at going way, way back, all the way back into the Old Testament. Now, I bring this up because a lot of folks, myself included, I'm reading pretty much every new performance mindset book that comes out all the time, everything that's fresh and new. And I say that because this doesn't just happen this hasn't happened in the last 100 years. This goes back thousands of years. In particular, if we focus on the teach us the brevity of life so that we may grow in wisdom, I just want to focus on that because that says what it means. Like life is short. So how are we going to self-actualize? How are we going to be the absolute best that we can be, even given the challenges that we face? Now, I also prefer a little bit of the New Testament, so I'll focus on that too, particularly around, and this is my favorite quote down here on the bottom from Matthew 6:34. And why I bring this up, because it says, therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. And why I bring that up is because we're going to talk a little bit about anxiety and gratitude and how that gratitude will help to overcome anxiety. So I often find myself, if I start to worry about what's going to happen tomorrow or Thursday or Friday, then I have to say, well, I'm missing my opportunity about right now. Well, if you're not a big fan of Matthew, what about this guy? What about Dave Matthews? I'm a huge fan of Dave Matthews as well. Now, one of my favorite songs, again, is Tripping Billies. Now, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow will die, right? It's got a nice toe tap and beat to it. Dave Matthews is a blast. I thought it was pretty cool with Dave because I've seen 15 shows with Dave Matthews. And then I met somebody a few weeks ago and they said they've gone to 100 shows. So I realized I don't know Dave as much as I thought I knew Dave. But if you think about that concept, right? And that was not biblically influenced, but ultimately it says the same thing, right? We have an opportunity, and that's why we call this the present, because we're right here, right? And we have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow or the next day or weeks after this. So how do we self-actualize? That's what we're going to talk about tonight. And the other aspect around this is waiting for the right moment for motivation. This goes back to the kicking yourself in the butt, right? So there's a saying that comes out that says the greatest stop in life is the start. And we'll talk about why that is. And so it's just getting that momentum that we need to kickstart ourselves so that ultimately we can get that initiative out in front of the world and moving forward. Now, I'm going to ask you guys, I can't see you, obviously, and we can't communicate, but you certainly can share via chat if you'd like. So now we're going to go back to the question that I asked you at the beginning. What can you really resolve to do today that'll eventually make a difference in the life of yourself or somebody else? So what I want you to do, and I can't see you, but what I want you to do is take out your phones and send yourself either a text message or an email message about what it is that you want to do. It doesn't have to be huge, doesn't have to be starting another business or whatever. It could be something very simple. It could be reaching out to an old friend or building new acquaintances or whatever it might be. Just send yourself an email right now. Hit send, and then hopefully tomorrow morning when you wake up and you've put away everything and you watch nothing but basketball tonight and you're relaxed and you forgot about everything else around you. But when you wake up in the morning, you see that little note to yourself. That's the start. That's all it takes is a couple quick things to do to push out to the universe and scream to the world to say, I'm going to do this because this is where I want to go. Now, let's figure this out, right? I talked to you a little bit about not having an appropriate system in place at my university, which was frustrating, but I graduated back in 96, so almost 30 years ago. So here I am actually creating the appropriate guide around Carpe Diem, right? And what is going to be the roadmap for all of us to utilize. Now, I don't know if folks have read the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. It's one of the top selling books, probably not of all time just yet, but it's getting there. So James Clear is really important because one of the concepts that he has is we never rise to the level of our goals. We only fall to the level of our systems. And so what does that mean? Ultimately, what it means is if I want to run the Boston Marathon, but I don't set up a system for myself to go out and actually execute that on a daily basis to reach my ultimate goal, then I will fail because the system's not in place. And so that's why I went about creating what I call the CD7 or the Carpe Diem 7, or really, truly 7 steps to seize your day. So I'm gonna pause real quick before we dive into this. Madeline, Jeff, any feedback at all from the crowd?
No Q&A yet.
Okay,
Nothing's popped up, Jim. So I'd say let's push ahead, and if anything does pop up, I'll flag you down.
perfect. So let's do that, and let's really start with the first step, which can be an aggressive step when you first read the slide. Accept mortality and ultimately embrace gratitude, right? So why do I start this way? Because as I mentioned earlier and throughout the couple of the other slides, is we have to face the limits of our existence to really appreciate the gift that we are given today, right? And so I think about this, and I'll share one of my stories with you. So for me, when I was 38, that's when I started my first business. And right at the same time that I was 38 years old, I was ultimately diagnosed with paroxysmal atrial fibrillation. And how did this come about? And so for me, I was a rower in college, so I still to this day get up at 5 o'clock every morning and I work out and I do that. That's just my mantra. That's how I roll. And so, excuse me, when I was 38, I was doing the same thing. So I was get up, but I found myself drinking a lot of water. I found myself getting up in the middle of the night, having to go use the bathroom. And so as any aging male knows, it's like, all right, is something wrong with me? Blah, 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 blah. And nothing was. But I found as I was getting up and walking to the bathroom, I was getting very dizzy and my heart was racing like never before. And I couldn't figure it out. And so, I did the right thing. I completely ignored it. And then I didn't tell my wife at all, right? And so until something presented to her. And so probably a few weeks later, I wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning to get ready to work out. Now, you can't see this, but I am 6'6" and about 200 some pounds. And so, I completely collapse and fall to the ground. I mean, there was no pit bull or Keisha singing timber or anything like that for me. I just went down with a massive thud. My wife wakes up. Now, my wife, on the contrary, is 5'2". So she certainly wasn't going to help me up, but she said, get your butt back into bed. What is going on? You need to see a doctor. I have no idea what's happening, right? So it was at that moment that I realized to myself, holy cow, because for all these years, those 38 years prior, I truly, and I don't know why, I truly felt like I was invincible. I thought I could take on the world, the oyster that it was, and nothing would bother me ever. But then it presented itself. And then that's when it came down and kind of crashing down to earth for me and said, oh boy, like my tomorrow is not really guaranteed. So what do I need to do? So I embraced the gratitude. And so that's what helped me to move forward. Now, some conceptual things around this. This goes back to Roman times, right? And so if anybody's followed Roman history or watched The Gladiator, we know about Marcus Aurelius. One of his statements was memento mori. Let's live with intention and urgency. Now we say that, and as you can see at the top of the screen, I've got mortality and gratitude laid out there. And I mentioned to you earlier why it's important to focus on gratitude. And this is not me just saying this is going to happen. This is actually scientifically proven that gratitude circuitry is completely different than anxiety circuitry, but the two cannot coexist at the same time. One will mute out the other. So it's up to us to choose. What do we want to do? So if we choose gratitude, then that's going to ultimately help us to enhance our mental and physical health and to minimize the stress that we're all facing that Jeff talked about earlier. So it's through those gratitude moments that help us to push out that anxiety as much as we can so that we can fight to live another day. Now, it's not easy because there is so much coming at us left and right. So this is a conscious choice that we have to make every single day. All right. Now, like we talked earlier, the greatest stop in life is getting started. And so when we talk about getting moving on the second step of starting to really synthesize and seizing the day, we don't want to overthink things. We need to take action within the first couple of steps of that idea coming to your head. And why is that? And it doesn't have to be huge, by the way. It could be simply as setting out an email, making a phone call, writing a note to yourself, whatever it is, get it going, right? Because here's the thing. There's another author that just wrote a very famous book, or it's very popular right now, Mel Robbins. I may have seen her book, but she's written a couple of different books. And her concept around this whole get moving process is that you have to do it within the first 5 seconds. Why? Because if you go beyond those 5 seconds, then your brain starts to figure out other ways and starts to rationalize why you shouldn't do what you just thought of. So you have to create the momentum. But let's talk a little bit about that activation energy that's on the other side. Well, so activation energy, if you do something within the first 5 seconds, should be pretty quick, right? And it shouldn't require a lot of energy to do so. But we know from a psychological framework perspective, if you procrastinate, guess what happens? Now that time that energy that's needed, you just doubled it, maybe tripled it. And so as the more procrastination incurs, the larger amount of energy it takes to kickstart something. So this is why we're talking about creating that moment and really getting things moving so that you ultimately don't miss out on any of those opportunities. So this is really important. And so some of the things that we need to worry about in this situation is just don't let me get complacent. And that's why I asked you to do that email to yourself. Get it going. The activation energy is very simple. Now, this next set here, step number 3, is about setting that audacious goal. So establish a bold goal, but keep in mind, right? My bold goal is probably a little different than yours and whatever it might be. But whatever that goal is, do create a goal that is so much so that it's going to scare you. It's going to excite you to ultimately say, oh my gosh, I just embraced this goal. How do I do it? But the other aspect of it is then you have to, once you yell out that goal, whatever it is, you have to create the habits that will challenge you to live outside that comfort zone. Because again, as I mentioned about James Clear's point, if you set up these goals, it doesn't matter if you don't have a system. So what are those systems and how is that going to go about? So these little tiny steps, right? So whatever that audacious goal is, then you're going to go get yourself set up and you got to do the things that start. Going to keep this moving forward. So for me, again, entrepreneur, so I shared my story with you, and long story short, right? So I had a business partner. My business partner left me 9 months into launching my business. Now it's a little bit of a funny story, right? Because here I was married, 2 kids. My wife wasn't working because she just quit her job so that we can move to New Hampshire and raise our kids. And then my business partner, they had no kids and his wife was gainfully employed. So I'm like, the pressure's not there for you, but the pressure's there for me. But he left. And so then I sat back and I took a long time to figure out what was I going to do for myself? What was going to be my bold and audacious goal now that I had to reboot this entire business? And silly me, because I was very naive at the time, I said, I'm going to, in the next 5 years, I'm going to make $1.5 million for my business, thinking that that was going to be enough for somebody to want to walk by or see me and say, wow, they built a beautiful business. Now, little did I know that the EBITDA on that was horrible, right? So I had to work on those concepts later down the road, which ultimately we did. But that was my bold and audacious goal. But what were those steps going to be that was going to get me to where I needed to get to? And that's what leads up to this, right? And when you set up those audacious goals, you have to do it in such a way that every single day you're doing some marginal improvements. And that's the 1% concept. Like, okay, can I be better than I was yesterday? By just a little bit, by 1%. And when we set those audacious goals and that provides us the clarity and the direction where we want to go. And then the other thing that comes up is grit, because you have to get gritty on this. And where does grit ultimately come from? Right? So if you built this goal and you're really passionate about it, well, it's your passion, it's your perseverance because you know you want to achieve that goal. That's what's going to create that grittiness. That's going to really get you started and moving in the right direction. But this is great. This is the easy part. The difficult part is when you start to talk about step 4 and what are these non-negotiables, right? These non-negotiables ultimately are the no excuse rules, right? And so these are the things you have to do and will do without any question. More importantly, this is because discipline in this stage is what ultimately creates freedom. Now, I'm sure you all can sit back and think to yourself, right? And I think with Jeff and the team there, you're all financially sound and they're taking care of you. Well, that's probably because 20, 30 years ago, you started investing, started doing some things, right? And that discipline of socking some money away has ultimately created the freedom that's provided you the life that you're currently living. And so this is the same thing, very simply, that you can do on whether it's a small project, a large project, or somewhere in between. So what does that freedom ultimately look like? Now, when you look at what my $1.5 million was, I needed to figure out what I was going to do there. So for me, in order to get that money going, I needed to make my sales calls every single day. Those were my non-negotiables. I needed to walk away with 10 to 20 hits, emails, communications, whatever it could be to drive that. But also comes up the idea around stop eating marshmallows. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with this whole concept, but there was a famous test that was done by Walter Mischler. And so he created this concept called the stop eating marshmallows. And the whole idea was he took a bunch of kids, and in front of these kids, he placed marshmallows. Now, who doesn't like a big, flat, puffy marshmallow, right? So he said he had two sets of kids. He's like, you can eat your marshmallow now to one set of kids, or you could take a look at your marshmallow. It's sitting right in front of you, and you could delay the gratification and get a greater reward for it. Ultimately, what they did was then they followed those kids that ultimately delayed the gratification, that had created, in essence, that in that short order, those non-negotiables. My non-negotiable is I'm not going to eat that marshmallow. Well, guess what happened? As they followed those kids in life, they actually turned out to have overall a better life than those that went for that immediate gratification. So what does that mean, right? So this is what leads to this step 5, which I think as these steps get a little bit more difficult because it's actually going to call out and some requirements for action. And that's ultimately breaking through the BS. And so what is that BS? And you can see it right there in front of you. It's the phone. The phone is probably the biggest issue that we have for BS in our entire lives, right? We think it's pretty smart, but it really bogs us down. So we need to identify and eliminate those distractions that are going to hold you back from achieving those non-negotiables. So if it does not contribute to your day's purpose, then you have to drop it. Now, I'm flippantly obviously talking about social media, phones, and everything else, but sometimes you might have to get a little bit more serious, and it's about people in your life. This becomes a tough thing, right? And it doesn't have to be physical either. It can be emotional. And so I'll go back to when my business partner left me and I had to retool my entire business. I struggled with the whole concept of like, I'm going about this, doing this myself. Psychologically, I wasn't really feeling like I was prepared to do it. And it was dragging me down. If I build my business now like this, is this going to be what would Joe think? Well, it didn't. At some point, I finally said, it doesn't matter what Joe thinks. He's not here. Right. So I had to eliminate that psychological distraction and I needed to break through it. And so that's what we have to do too. So for instance, when it comes about, even whatever it might be in your life, I think something that's exceptionally popular now is not drinking, right? If you look at the generational divides between my generation and the current generation coming up, kids aren't drinking. They might be doing some other things, which are legal now, but they're not drinking. And so I say that because, if you go down the route of like trying to take on a healthier lifestyle and eliminating some drink, and you go out to have a drink with somebody and you say, I'm not drinking, they might pressure you to say, no, come on, just have one. But if you decide, no, maybe you're not the right people to be with, right? So you have to eliminate those individuals around it. And the other aspect of this too, as we look at the challenges that are in front of us, is you want to establish what is the flow state. And this is when we're really starting to talk about the productivity. Now, what is the flow state? Particularly the flow state, and this is a phrase that is coined by the gentleman by the name of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. And the flow state is ultimately when you get into a situation where you are of so much high impact activities going on. It's purpose driven. You're almost in tunnel vision, so to speak, and nothing can bother you from what you're doing. And hours go by and your productivity is amazing. This is what happens ultimately when you break through the BS and you stick to your non-negotiables. Now, the other aspect of this flow state, which is, whether you want to call it feng shui or something in your environment, is creating an environment that is full of productivity. Now, so for me on days, so I'm not working, obviously 15-hour days like I used to, because I've learned a little bit, like, how do I do this more effectively? So what I do is when I sit down for 4 to 5 hour days, and I know that I'm eliminating my phone, it's nowhere near me. Now there's days in which I break and I'm weak in those things. And so I'm not perfect, but I try to create that flow state for myself by eliminating some of those distractions. And that's ultimately what gets us to where we need to be. Step 6, though, is something that I love to focus on this because this is really around, kind of what Madeline spoke of around my purpose. So when you talk about embracing the pain, and this is getting comfortable with the discomfort, the failure, the rejection, the pain, anything that comes along with trying to seize your day. those challenges you might face on a daily basis, or maybe it's even larger than that. But you have to kind of get comfortable with that pain, because that's where our growth comes from. And particularly, there's a concept around what is called PTG. Now, I'm taking this a little bit lighthearted when we just focus in on the business side of things. And PTG stands for post-traumatic growth. Now, in my case, it was more than business, right? I had business plus cardiac. And so it's that post-traumatic growth. It's when we embrace the challenges, embrace the pain that we're going through. I'm not talking about ignoring it. I don't want to be toxically positive in those situations. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But what I'm talking about is saying, all right, how do I own this? How do I take this on for myself? And it's been found, again, through psychological frameworks. While I can tell you my N of 1 experience, this has been found across the world in deep research around the psychological frameworks of what this is ultimately meaning. It's embracing the PTG, that pain, so that you can ultimately grow. And this is where you build your resilience. This is where your personal growth is going to drive you to the next level. And so then let's kick to that. What does that look like? Step 7. Now, I think this by far this is your ceremonial, all right, I kicked some serious tail day today. You're going to celebrate the wins, and you're going to stack them. And they don't have to be huge wins, by the way. They could be simple. Like, you think about stacking a sheet of paper. You put 2, 3, 4, 5. Now all of a sudden you've got 500 sheets of paper, and you can stack those wins and you can see them. It becomes tangible. So you want to win again and win more. But how do you do this, right? So this is really what's important. You need to reflect. You need to reward yourself because you're working your tail off. But you also need to rest and recharge. And that's where you give yourself some time to pull back from the chaos that is going on in the world, maybe with your work, maybe with the pain that you're suffering. It's okay to give yourself some time. And the word that I want to kind of highlight, and what's sandwiched in between all those R words, is forgive. You have to provide yourself some forgiveness. Now, I try to do this on a daily basis when I'm focusing on what I have to do throughout the day. But this is also on a much larger scale too. But at the end of each day, when I'm about to lay my head down on the pillow, and I'm thinking about, all right, what happened today? What did I do? What didn't I do? I try to focus more on the what did I do? But then I also say to myself, all right, I forgive myself for not doing this or that, right? Because you don't want to beat yourself up. There's more than enough pain coming at you or challenges coming at you, let alone you attacking yourself. So I forgive myself. And why I do that is because then I know, guess what's going to happen? Maybe by the grace of God, I wake up in the morning and I get to do it all over again. And so then I'm going to go back and I'm going to say, all right, how do I improve upon what I just did yesterday? It's about those incremental gains that are going to give the long-term strategy for success. So that's really the 7 steps. Now, these 7 steps are perfect when we live in an ideal world and when you live in a vacuum. They're easy to manage. I'm sure you're probably going through this. Yeah, I do this every day, or this, that, and everything, right? But when crap hits the fan, what do you do now? So for me, this is where I want to share a little bit about my journey. Particularly, as I said, I was starting my business, and this is my heartbeat, by the way. So I started my business, and I was ultimately diagnosed with what is known as paroxysmal atrial fibrillation. I'm not going to get real technical here, but I kind of want to highlight a few things. So when you look in the center of that little slide there, you'll see paroxysmal AFib. Now, what does that mean? Well, that just means that anytime within 7 days, I'm going to go into some sort of AFib event. Now, quickly to tell you what AFib is, and maybe some of you in the audience have it, but AFib ultimately is an erratic behavior of your heart. There is nothing in sync about it, right? The upper chambers and the bottom chambers, your atria and your ventricles aren't working together. It's complete chaos. And so that's where you have your challenges. So I was going through that, heartbeats of anywhere between 130 to 140 beats per minute. But eventually that became persistent. And so what that means is I was in continual atrial fibrillation longer than 7 days. And then I ultimately converted into what is known as long-standing persistent AFib. And that ultimately it just never went away. I needed to have some intervention. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Now, I'm excited to say this because here I am literally yesterday, which was March 18th, 6 years ago yesterday, I went through my final cardiac ablation, which ultimately they go up into your heart and they burn the backside of your heart. And they cut off the electrical activity that's causing the AFib. And so I've been AFib free for 6 years now. So I celebrate St. Patty's Day on Monday, and then my heart being in great shape on Tuesday. And so, but there's everything in between that it was an absolute mess. And so when I had my first cardiac ablation, it went pretty well. But then unfortunately something came out of that, a flutter, and that is a rapid heart rate. So now my chaoticness of my heart was gone, but now my heart was just racing. So I needed to go through a cardiac, what they call a cardioversion. And so that's me getting the paddles to the chest. And what was exciting about though that at this time, right? So by the way, I'm building my business while all this is happening. And so I get myself reset. I jumped, apparently the nurses told me I jumped almost out of the hospital bed because of the charge, but now I'm back to normal sinus rhythm and life is great, right? And what's happening? Well, I'm driving up and down. Like I live in New Hampshire, right? And I had this weird thought that all my business was going to be built in Boston. But guess where it was built? It was built in New Jersey and in California. So I was always on the road. And so invariably, as time went on, things started happening again to my heart. The AFib came back. I wasn't feeling as great as I thought. And this is what ultimately happened to me. I want you to listen to this for a second. So there was a little bit of a pause. And what is that pause? So that was me at that time being diagnosed with what you call tachy-Brady syndrome. And tachy-Brady syndrome, quickly, tachy is an elevated heart rate. And the Brady is your heart saying, I'm tired, I need a break. So what my doctors found for about 4 to 5 months, my heart was pausing 60 times a month for 6 seconds each pause. At any one of those moments, they said I could have died. I didn't. I don't know why I didn't, but I didn't. But meanwhile, I'm living, right? I'm going through this. I had no idea I had tachy-Brady syndrome until I had a follow-up visit with my doctor. So I'm driving up and down I-95 in between New Jersey and Boston and New Hampshire. And I'm falling asleep at the wheel thinking I'm just tired. And I'm punching myself in my quads to stay awake as I'm driving because I want to get home, because I want to really rest when I get home. And that's ultimately what was happening to me, was my heart was pausing for an extended period of time. So ultimately what happened is I did get a pacemaker put in, and that controlled the stopping. But about a week after my pacemaker was put in, if you can hear those heartbeats, that's 240 beats per minute. About 1 week before Christmas, my heart, even though I had the pacemaker, decided to take off. It didn't want to slow down. I was about 240 beats per minute, and I'm going down. It's the end, right? I'm blacking out. Everything crazy is happening. Paramedics rush into the house. I ultimately am here because I'm on the other side of that, which is amazing. And so I ultimately make it to the hospital, and they try to cardiovert me again. And so they do it once, they do it twice, they do it 3 times. Let's not stop there. 4 times. 4 times they try to convert me, and nothing changed. So now I had to wait for what would be my final ablation that I just talked to you about. So I had another 3-4 weeks to wait before that final procedure could be done. But as I wake out of my anesthesia, I look up at the cardiologist and I said, did we get it? And she says, unfortunately, Mr. Kaveney, we do not. We tried it 4 times, but take a look down at your chest. We started to burn you. And I look at my chest and I literally have burn marks on both sides of my pectorals. And she's like, we have to give up. We're going to try it medicinally for the next couple of weeks before your ablation. So I share this story with you with the whole idea that not that my story is the worst it could ultimately be, but what this tells you and shows you a little bit is that it's possible. It's possible to get through the challenges that we face by approaching it these ways. Now, I didn't know what I was doing when I was doing all of this. I didn't know what I was doing when I was building my business. I didn't know what I was doing when I was going through all this cardiac stuff. I was building my own Carpe Diem, my CD7, but I didn't know what it was because I really didn't start diving into performance psychology and all those things until well after it. And then I realized, no, wait a minute, there's some science behind this. There's something to what I was doing. But the thing is, though, I want to really highlight here is not only do the challenges that we face come at us and we should embrace them, But one thing I want to tell you too, before we dive into the Power Five, is this. These are sayings that you're going to hear from people as you're going through it, because I heard this all the time. And they were well intended by people that loved me very, very much. Just stay positive. Stop being negative. Look on the bright side. Or my favorite one is, it's happening for you, not to you. Now, I don't want to hear that. Not when this is happening to me. This is toxic positivity. This is what we need to avoid. So I want to be very clear as we go through that CD7 steps. That's not me ignoring or saying, as you're thinking through the challenges you're facing, like, oh, we're just skipping all of this. No, not absolutely not. This is us saying, let's embrace it, right? And how are we going to embrace it? And that's why we're going to talk about the Power Five, which you can't do the CD7 without the Power Five. And this is how you manage that mishap in your life. And it goes like this. Step one, I kind of slipped up a few times throughout the presentation, but step one is this, is embracing the suck. Really, it's the power of the pause, right? When you get punched in the gut or shocked on the chest or whatever it might be, right? Don't react to it immediately. Give yourself at least 24 hours to consume the challenge and then begin to respond. And again, this isn't me telling you this. This is backed by psychological frameworks that talk about emotional regulation and mindfulness and self-compassion, all of that stuff that prepares you to really take on the challenges that you are facing. It's because of this actually ultimately will build your composure and your strength and your resiliency. Now, I say start with 24 hours minimum. It could take a week, take 2 weeks, whatever it takes. But eventually you have to rise up and get out of that what you're in, because there's those two choices, right? You choose not to decide, or you still make a choice, right? So you can choose to wallow in what it is, or you can choose to embrace what it is you're going through and own that pain, own those challenges, and don't give it enough power to control the way you want to live your life. That's what we're talking about here. And how do you do that, right? And one of my favorite quotes from Einstein is this. He says, I have no special talents. I'm only passionately curious. So this is where the power of curiosity comes into play. After you've given yourself time to take a look at the pain, the challenges you're facing, be wildly curious. Work to effectively question every single angle of the challenges you're facing. Learn from it, grow from it, all those things, because that's ultimately what's going to lead you to come out of this. You're going to come out of it smarter, because these psychological frameworks are going to help you. These are all driven by growth mindset, cognitive flexibility, all of these things. But this, again, is going to provide you with that resilience and that fortitude. And when I talk about resilience so much, I wanted to use a little bit of an example that I like to refer to as the reed and the mighty oak, right? When we talk about resiliency. And this is the same thing when it comes to dealing with challenges, right? So if you think about the reed that rests in the water, right? And as the tides ebb and flow back and forth, what does the reed do? It goes with the current, comes back. But when the current is completely gone and there's no longer there, what happens to that reed? It stands back up again. But on the contrary, there's the mighty oak. And the mighty oak is completely strong and unwavering. And if there was a wave coming on a mighty oak, I've never seen that before, but if there was, work with me a little bit. If there was, that mighty oak would fight it tooth and nail. And so there's times to be the mighty oak and there's times to be the reed. So you have to choose when you're going to do that, to ebb and flow or to stand firm. But you'll know that when you're going through this. Particularly as you move on to the next one, which I love this one, is because it's the power of the reset. This goes back to the whole thing we talked about. You can take your time, deal with your challenge, be curious about what it is, but you have to restart. Because if you don't restart, then you're going to miss out on those opportunities to truly seize the day and to self-actualize. So you're going to embrace the challenge, you're going to realign, and then you're going to restart it all. And I know we talked about earlier, we said, hey, you got to do it within 5 seconds. Might not be kickstarting the whole thing all over again, but that new start might be simple, something simple as making a phone call, getting out of bed, taking a walk, eating healthy, whatever it might be to help you overcome the challenges and the pain that you're facing. Now, what's going to drive this is ultimately the power of desire, and that comes from within you. And so you were something before this pain. And that's when I think about Steve Jobs' quote, right? You don't connect the dots in your life moving forward. You connect the dots in your life in rears. And so I think about the challenges that I faced in my life that built me into the person that I was, that helped me to prepare and take on my age 38 challenge of building a business, as well as dealing with my AFib. And so it was those steps, those dots that helped me to build my desire. And so you have to go back to who you were before this was and feed that desire with the challenge that you're faced. And that's going to help you to keep moving forward. And the most important one, I think, out of all of them is all about you. Oops. Is all about you. And that's the power of your belief in yourself. Remind yourself to stay unlimited, positive in mind, not toxically positive, positive in your mind. Because I've already said, you got to embrace those challenges. You got to embrace the suck. You got to ignore some of that toxic positive that might be coming at you. Embrace it in your way. But this will help you to keep a focused mind, clear in vision. And it's those dots, it's those messy things that happen in your life that's currently happening now that 5 years, 10 years from now, hopefully you will see the strength that you are and that strength of a person that you are at that point and say, that prepared me for who I was. Because ultimately it is the dots in our life that help us to create the carpe diem and the ability to seize the day today. So it's the people, it's the habits, it's the negative and the positive. It's our choices. It's these dots that help you to seize the day. And thank you very much for your time today. And I just put up a quick little slide about myself as well. So some information if folks are interested in working with me down the line, feel free to reach out and we can connect. And that is the end of the show. So I'll turn it back over to the team.
I'll take that, Jim. Like, that was awesome. Thanks. Again, you just to reveal like some of that really personal stuff takes a lot. And again, we think about challenges we go through, and it might be something as I don't want to say silly. That's not their word, but like, geez, the stock market was down 2% today, and like woe be me. And again, putting these in perspective, I think the resilience piece and like the kind of the resetting or stuff that like really differentiate the good from the great, like we'll talk about tonight. Watching some of these wonderful young men play basketball, like 2 or 3 times down the court, tough shot, you could dwell on it, you could go ahead and really get down on yourself where hey, like let me just I know I'm great, I'm going to reset, I'm going to be put the team on my back or whatever the case may be. But like back to as Maddie was saying before, we want to be messengers of your wellness, right? And so wellness is about mental fortitude as much as we talk a lot about the financial side. We had a guest talk to us a couple times over the last 2 years about nutrition and like what you put in your body. That helps. That's important. We've talked to exercise physiologists and physical therapists, and we deal with some of the pain. But like again, the thing that just drives us every day is up top, right? It's our noggin, and so just having you take us through some of the stuff that really took you through your journey is really great, and we're appreciative of that. Again, I see folks can follow you on LinkedIn. Obviously the book is something that really gets into this stuff in some detail, and we're just grateful for the time and the effort there. And so I don't know, Maddie or Tom, you want to add anything? See if we have anything in the Q&A, but like we really do appreciate you taking the time tonight with us.
Thank you, Jeff.
I was going to ask just a quick question, if that's okay. Jim,
Please.
So I was curious, just as you think about just applying everything that you talked about, right? So kind of the practical application, when you think about goal setting, right? A lot of our clients are at different life stages, and
Yep.
some on the earlier end of their investing career and starting families, and then others are retired and looking at kind of the empty nest at this point.
'Right.
When you think about setting goals, as an example, I guess, how do you apply all that you talked about? How do you put it into practice? And what are some takeaways that I guess our clients could walk away with to apply it?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and this is not a sales pitch by any means, but I'm a trainer by trade, right? So the greatest and the worst sessions are those that don't have any follow-up, right? So we're in the process of building a program, as I mentioned to you guys earlier on too, right? So we launched this program back in the fall, and so we're in the process of building out a 7-week curriculum for folks that are we're going to do this for kids as well as adults that are suffering some challenges. And the whole idea around this is because everybody's goals, audacious goals that we talked earlier, are different, right? And so if you're 65 and fully retired, it could be, how do I lower my golf handicap? So what are the habits that I need to do there? Or what do I need to do to prepare for my grandkids to have a very comfortable life and things like that, right? So everybody's goals are different. And so the whole idea is to kind of take a look and some stock in yourself and say, what is it that really drives me? What's going to get me up in the morning? Now, I come from a very large family, 9 kids. I know Madeline mentioned it earlier. So I'm 50, so I'm the youngest, and so three of my brothers and sisters are fully retired, which is so strange to me, right? So they're all 65, 63, and 62, and they're fully retired. And the way they look at life is completely different. Their goals are completely different than mine. And so I think that's what you just have to simply do is say, what really is purposeful for me, and what's going to drive me to get me to be where I want to be the next thing, right? That's all it is. It's just a personalization around it. And so these are general concepts that we think can be customized to individuals. And the key thing we want to do and around this is for getting people to write their stories as well. So there's narrative psychology, if anybody's not heard of that, but narrative psychology, it's where it takes in consideration your opportunity to write down what you've been through in your life. I just happen to write an entire book about it, right? And so that unto itself, you don't have to do that. You don't have to get that crazy. But you can write these mantras and really capture your life quickly down, and then say, all right, what's my next step? How do I take those dots that I did all my life? Now, what do I do next? And so that's a part of a narrative psychology that helps you to overcome the challenges that you face in the past and really apply them something in the future. So it's a long answer to your very short question, Tom. So my apologies.
No, that was perfect. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I think, again, it's whether it's a little step or it's a bigger step, whether it is like, just a part of the goal or, the big, bold, audacious goal. I
Yeah.
think, it's nice to, again, be able to take some tangible step, like you said, right away, so that we can move forward in our lives.
And that's all it takes is just a simple email or a shouting out to the world.
Great. Well, look, it is time for the brackets to get some attention. Jim, thank you so much for
My pleasure.
your expertise and your time tonight. And again, folks, thanks for joining us. We appreciate your hour. When we do our market update, we won't be able to give you that hour. We'll give you probably an hour and a half. But again, keep sending us suggestions as it relates to content and ideas. Really, I can think of a woman out in California. I won't name her, but she talked a lot about the idea of like having someone on who can help with dealing with stress and overcoming that. And so, Jim, you just fit the bill there perfectly. So
Thank you. Grateful. Appreciate the opportunity. Good luck, everybody.
Good night.
Jim.